nomination. She wanted to make the best deal for herself with Barack Obama and held over his head the nuclear option of getting her supporters to back John McCain. And I think up until the point that McCain picked Sarah Palin as his running mate, it was a credible threat. But I think John McCain erred on that, or maybe he was just looking at the way the country is headed and decided at the last second maybe he didn't want to be president after all, and said let's get a vice president that will end my candidacy, graciously, and I'll take the rest of my campaign war chest and retire quietly. But yeah, there's obviously been a lot of deal making going on. Barack Obama obviously has made a lot of deals, which is why we have so many of the old Clinton cronies showing up in his administration. And it is very distressing for people who wanted to listen to his message of change that we can believe in, because we're not seeing change. Yeah, the guy in the Oval Office is different, but everything around him basically harkens back to the 1990s. And I'm very distressed by Hillary Clinton coming out and saying that she's just not going to negotiate with Hamas because, like it or not, Hamas is the elected government of another country, and that's the Secretary of State's job, is to talk to the elected government of other countries. And Hillary is starting out saying, I'm not going to do my job, let's just drop bombs and get it over with. So that's a warning sign.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Middle East. Well, how do you feel about the policy? I mean, Obama's openly talking about a redistribution of forces into Afghanistan. I mean, yes, we're going to see a de-escalation in Iraq, but he says we're going to send more troops into Afghanistan. I mean, I feel like all they're doing is keeping their presence there as more stabilization occurs in Iraq. I feel like the big plan is a Eurasian Union, obviously. You know, Israel is our ally. Saudi Arabia, we're still pretty much doing positive dealings with. The only rogue in that region is really Iran. I mean, Pakistan and India, you could argue, but Biden's out in Pakistan trying to smooth things over this week after the Mumbai attacks. Well, well, I feel like he's over there basically to see how much he has to cover up for our end. I mean, obviously, you know, Biden is well aware of the ISI. He knew about the funding of the hijackers. We cover that in Fabled Enemies. There's no doubt about it. He was on the floor on the 12th talking about pretending to be our friend in Pakistan, yet he's meeting with the head of the ISI at that point. He knows of the dealings there. And so he goes there now after the Mumbai attacks, you know, lead back to an ISI asset, a CIA asset, and the governments of India are openly saying that Pakistani intelligence was involved. So he has to go over there. I don't think that we really want to bomb Pakistan, although that's been in the news lately, too. What do you think? You think we're going to bomb Pakistan?
I think we're probably going to go into Pakistan, or we're going to support India going into Pakistan, because if you look at the geography of the region, you have got Afghanistan to the north, which is pretty much under U.S. control nominally. You have India, which is very much an ally of the United States. For China to be able to send pipelines through to Middle East oil, they must go through Pakistan. So if we can turn Pakistan into a war zone, then that cuts China off from one of the resources they need industrially, and I think that's why there is so much pressure on Pakistan right now. It's kind of a repeat of what we saw the U.S. try to do in Georgia and Ossetia, because that land corridor between the Caspian and the Black Sea was the only route by which Russia could militarily support Iran by ground convoy. And I think the goal there was to get a border war going, which would basically blockade those tunnels and prevent Russia from supporting Iran. But when that war didn't work out so well, I think that's when the push to invade Iran began to wane, when they couldn't keep Russia out of the region. So they shifted over to Pakistan. Now Israel's talking about a bombing attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure again. It's definitely a lot of chaos, and as I like to tell my own listeners, we're in a very awkward stage in our planet's history where all of our immediate future is basically being determined by whichever world leader is the least mentally stable, and we've got some real nutcases in power right now.
I agree with that. So you think that Iran is relatively going to be put on the back burner, and that the real conflict may be in Pakistan? I hope you're wrong. I hope that installing a new dictator will at least, wave that off. I figured that's what they were trying to do it diplomatically. But the rhetoric is there. I mean, they're talking about them being the new big enemy, and I think that just one type of terror event, either here or in Europe, being blamed on Pakistan, could be the catalyst to send, our forces or NATO forces or UN forces in there, and that would be a total and complete nightmare. That might be, most people are saying the Iran conflict was what was going to spark, World War III, but a conflict with Pakistan could very well do the same.
You're absolutely correct here. And the issue here isn't whether we want to go into Iran or we want to go into Pakistan. There are numerous players and numerous factions, and each has their own agenda. Israel still wants us to attack Iran. The U.S., I think, has decided they can't do it because they can't keep Russia from intervening militarily. So now they're looking at Pakistan, if for no other reason than to block off China's access to Middle Eastern oil and force them to come do business with the United States for their petroleum. And, again, it's that chessboard around the oil fields that's really in play.
You think that Russia is unhappy with its place in the world? I mean, obviously there was a play, like you said, in that South Ossetia-Georgian conflict to see what kind of a world power they still were. Do you feel like they feel like they don't want to be a second world nation in this global order? I mean, that's how I feel like the play is. You had Putin and Bush sitting next to each other at the Olympics as this conflict's going on. I don't think that Putin is very happy with the way that he was treated, and I don't think that he's very happy with, the U.S. basically trying to build the North American Union here at home, and I really do believe trying to build a Eurasian Union right around the corner from their home.
Well, I don't think it's a question of whether Russia wants to be number one or number two. I think Russia, certainly looking at what Putin was doing right after he got rid of the oligarchs, I think he wants peace and prosperity for his people because his own political fortunes are dependent on that. But he lives, unfortunately, in a time when there are some very belligerent nations who see their own fortunes greatly improved by major warfare. I mean, setting aside for the moment Israel's obvious push for war in Lebanon, war in Iran, war against Syria, war against Jordan, the list goes on. We have in the United States a large number of people who are looking at our economic problems and thinking that a major war at least will disguise the symptoms, give them something to blame it all on. I mean, Americans will put up with lack of food, lack of clothes, lack of fuel if they think there's a war going on and they have to rally around the flag. And if you look back at the history of America's participation in major wars, each one happened just as the United States was dealing with a major depression. There was a depression in the early 1900s. We got out of that by going into World War I. With that whole deception over the Lusitania. We were in the Great Depression just before Roosevelt got us into World War II with the Pearl Harbor deception. So now we're in serious economic trouble. People are saying this is a new depression. And sure enough, we have the U.S. government that's out there saying, let's kick off a major war and crank up the defense industries and make bombs and just, at least everybody will be distracted from how bad things are because there's a war on and we've got to rally around the flag. And I think that's their thinking. And it's not going to work this time because, first of all, because of the alternative media, the American people know they're being lied to about these situations. They're not going to trust the government's story about any new war. Second of all, the United States is not the industrial powerhouse it was for World War I and World War II. We can't sustain the kind of manufacturing output it takes to support a major global war. And our economy is already in a shambles. I think a new major war will be the end of the United States.
I agree with you, and I think what it'll do is restructure us, Canada, and Mexico together. My fear is, all right, let's say that the dollar totally and completely collapses in the next 6 months, and it's no longer the world reserve currency. That alone could probably start some real military conflicts. And like you said, we don't have the factories that we once had. We can't just take a factory and take the workers there and suspend whatever product they were making because they don't make anything here anymore. You can't make weapons in a factory that's not fit to make shoes because we don't make anything. The last thing we made here were cars, and that's about to go under as well. I mean, we're spread so thin militarily. Is this going to be like the first United States military defeat? I mean, people could argue Vietnam and everything, but I'm talking about on a global scale.
I think it very well could be because if you look at the historical precedent for the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, Rome began to decline when they spread their legions so thin they only had to lose one up in Germany, and then they could no longer police their global empire, and the little fringe nations began breaking away, and the revenues to Rome dropped, and Rome sank into debt and collapsed.
Unbelievable. It's the Alex Jones Show. We're talking with Mike Rivero of WhatReallyHappened.com. We're going to be talking the economy and Obama and more. Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.tv.
Before you throw away your used batteries, you need to listen to this. Now going